What up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Blacktop Podcast. It's me, I guess, your host or whatever. My name's DJ, and here with my cousin Christian. Yeah, unfortunately, though, we are down to man. We're two-man gaming it tonight. Ruben is not feeling too well. So first of all, Ruben, bro, hope you feel better soon, and hopefully we're nice and whole again. But Christian, what's up, man?
What's up? Uh, Not much, to be honest. I got nothing to report on, to be honest. I'm chilling.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I guess so basically what's going to happen today is we're going to go off of a few questions that we have, whether it's like about teams, about the league, just whatever's on the table kind of thing, as long as it's about basketball. But first things first, you know, our condolences to the people that have been affected by Robert Sarver. I think that's that scumbag's name, owner of the Suns or whatever. Very very scum of the earth type beat, but I think he got off pretty scot free, all things considered. I think it was like a 1 year ban from the team and like a $10 million fine or something like that or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. Did you hear about it, Chin?
I actually, as I was going home, I saw some news, but I didn't read into it. I don't really know what happened. I mean, without maybe saying any trigger warning type stuff, can you
Yeah.
explain it?
TLDR basically like one, he was racist, and two, he committed very I'll use the word lewd acts. I think one that was really, I don't want to say it as eye opening, but it kind of was that apparently, I don't know why he was getting a physical, or it was like something of that nature where he was like with a doctor and then he like purposely dropped his pants, and yeah, that went how that went. But you know, I think first of all, I think it's pretty light. I mean, it was what, only like a bit less than a decade where we had the whole Robert Donald Sterling or whatever the dude's name was, where obviously that went how that went, and now he's no longer the owner of the Clippers. And I think this situation evokes a lot of the same sentiments in that, you know, it's inequality is inequality at the end of the day. And I think that he got off pretty scot free. In my opinion, I think he should have to like, I don't remember if he like was forced to sell or he just got flat out banned, but something along the lines to where I don't think the Sarvers should be in charge of Phoenix anymore. But yeah, what do you think?
No, I think there's no question about it. Like, this isn't really a debatable topic. I think if you are thinking otherwise, it's pretty kind of, you're on some weirdo shit. Not gonna lie.
Yeah,
Like,
you know,
like it's one of those things where like it kind of just shows that you kind of need ownership in the NBA that's more in like a business state of mind, like cooperative. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with like co-op businesses that are essentially like owned by the people, but I mean, there's no such thing in the NBA right now. But to even see like multiple people own a franchise, I think is kind of how these things don't happen, or at least don't initially happen, is by like not having someone have all this power over like $1 billion, I guess you could say, company or brand, really, right? I
oh,
mean, you could talk,
100%.
you could talk more on it, but yeah, I think it's just objectively like there's no right answer that could really, yeah,
Oh, no
kind of,
doubt. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that was well put. I don't really want to spend too much time on this, but I just think the fact that, the world we live in now, obviously with all like the protests that have been happening and overall just this whole kind of journey and challenging to instill more equality in the world, I think this is an instance where you kind of gotta get rid of the old and in with some new, more progressive stuff. But anyways, let's move past that. So as we said, or as I said earlier, we're just gonna be running off some questions that we got, and I'll start off with this one. Christian, what are your thoughts on the in-season tournament that has been proposed?
So I've seen the rules myself, and I think I'm still not understanding like the reasoning behind it, to be honest.
Mm. And yeah,
Uh,
I think, sorry to cut you off real quick, but for those that don't know, I hope I'm getting this right, but as I have come to learn, I believe it's uh teams play quote unquote cup games throughout the month of November, and the 8 teams with the best record go on to have single elimination. And these games count toward the grand total, the 82 that every team plays, but the team that does make the final plays an extra game. So whoever makes the final plays 83 games in total. At least that's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, from what you know, is it really just like a pre-championship or like a early season like tournament? Really, like that's all it really is.
I I don't know too much about it. My main thing though is like, what do you do with the stats from those games, specifically the final, if it ends up being like an extra one? Because I mean, they don't count play-in stats right now. Like those are kind of, I don't want to say irrelevant, but you know, it's ambiguous in the sense that it's kind of not recorded as much as like regular season regular stats are. So I it's very weird, I'd say.
Yeah, I think based on everything I kind of know about it and just yeah, I think my own opinion really. I don't know. I think things like this kind of I get that they're trying to shake up the league and like kind of keep things fresh and new, but I do think there's a way to do that with still keeping it recreational and not a part of like the actual league format. Because I think the play-in tournament was already a good addition, but I think this doesn't really sound like it's necessarily benefiting teams in like every single way. I think it kind of forces like I can see in some ways like that this tournament could kind of force teams to compete in a way where it can kind of somehow and I don't think thinking about it maybe it's not really actually going to do much but somehow kind of help the tanking system that goes on in the NBA,
Mm,
just kind of forcing teams to be competitive and fill up seats and stuff like that. um, but I don't know, it's one of those things that I don't think moves the needle that much further in terms of like league progression. I think we've talked about it numerous times that it's even really the theme of this pod at the end of the day is to see like a one-on-one or three-on-three tournament that's recreational that even happens like
100%.
that happens like during all-star break or like extend all-star break, like a lot of all-star break is really just a week. There's like sports out there like Formula One that take like month-long breaks, and you can honestly do the same thing in basketball, and I don't think anyone would be mad about it.
100%. Yeah, I think it's not necessarily clear, but you kind of see the inspiration they get from like football or soccer if you're in North America, where you have like the FA Cup and the, yeah, just those overall in-season tournaments that are, you get silverware at the end of the day, but it's not necessarily contributing to like your league standing as a whole. And I there's obviously, I think, a lot of negativity, but and I'm kind of like, I'd say I'm about 60-40 on the negative side, but I I'm really waiting to see what's the overall point of it, in that what's the reward. I mean, you know, as great as, $1 million is obviously life-changing money to anybody, but in the grand scheme of things, is Steph Curry going to get up for $1 million? Is LeBron, is KD, are the guys that are making like $50 million in 1 year really going to come out? And I mean, I listened to Through the Wire earlier, and they were talking about how in an earlier interview, Mark Cuban is like, not, yeah, he's like very against it. And that he's basically saying that if it does happen, then people like Luca are going to sit. So I think it's really, there's obviously a lot of negative connotation behind it, in that, you know, as cool as it does sound from a competitive standpoint, it's a lot like, say, the 73-9 Warriors, in that, you can make all that history, you can win all those games, but at the end of the day, the chip's all that really counts. So whether it's, I don't really know what you could even give as a reward, because I mean, obviously money is one thing. I think increased lottery odds has been another thing thrown about, and I don't think that's really fair, because you know that allows teams like, say, who don't have a lot of picks. Let's see, like the Lakers. See if say if they win, then that whole kind of draft capital that they lost gets reiterated or boosted in a sense, and that's not really fair to a team like say the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have all these picks, have all this capital, and it takes a big hit because now that this big team, this big giant of a team that has all the star players, gets another advantage. Where the draft is really supposed to be for the teams that are at like the disadvantage, who are still figuring out their like thing, and just overall, it's there's a lot of tinkering that I think's to be done about like the game itself more than there is like these sort of showy cosmetic things, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Like I can see in some ways that like it kind of increases fan experience, and I think the comparison to like the English Premier League in soccer or English football, like an idea of like a FA Cup is cool. Um, I think it's just that those type of things though are like built on tradition,
Yeah,
and
100%.
like this is one of those things where they're kind of just trying to force that upon something that really isn't tradition. Um, and I feel like yeah, this isn't something that really necessarily. I don't know. I don't know if there's another way to really put it that I haven't really even mentioned, but it just doesn't seem beneficial towards like kind of growing the culture of basketball. Like I think there's like if anything, like what would be awesome is for them to like just do like say international games that are a part of the regular season, or like
Mm,
do like do like outdoor games even, and like set up an outdoor like court and like kind of fun like neighborhoods, for example, like stuff like that would be like moving, like to like I don't know, for example, like have Rucker Park like be like updated and used for like a real NBA game. Like how crazy that would go. Like obviously, logistically, like sure it'd be hard, but like that would like actually like shock the people. This tournament is just for money.
100%. I mean, there's that whole legend of like the greatest game never played, where it's like the who's who was like a young LeBron. I think MJ was supposed to play like the Rucker, and then that whole thing got shut down. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll see kind of more details on this as the season approaches. Obviously, it's supposed to take into effect next year, but yeah, Christian, throw out your question, baby.
All right, my first question out of all mine, I think this question was like my favorite to come up with because I think of this player in this specific way. But my question is, if Philly fails to make the conference finals this year, does James Harden end up in a Russell Westbrook type position? And what I mean by this is he like ridiculed and on that same level of pedestal where it's accolades and nothing to show? Because I think that's where people place Russ now, is that they don't really care if he's had maybe in consensus the best MVP season ever, because he like has done nothing to show for it, or at least like hasn't. I mean, he's made he's made a few conference appearances and one finals appearance, but beyond that, I mean, he's kind of ridiculed these days. People hate him. I do think James Harden kind of sits
Like he's
in
on the
that bubble
bubble
right
of
now.
it. Mm,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a
What do you think?
that's a good question. Well, first of all, I think we need to like unpack it in the sense of why that happened with Russ. And I think it all really stems from how shitty of a season the Lakers had. Not, fuck the playoff or fuck like the conference finals. Those motherfuckers didn't even make the playoffs. And at the end of the day, I think Russell Westbrook definitely took the brunt of the criticism, but I don't think it was necessarily warranted in that. Well, yeah, maybe there were like a lot of games where he was really ball dominant and really decided to like try to put the team on his back when in reality that's LeBron or AD's job. But at the end of the day, they say the best ability is availability. Russ was, I think he played like 72 games. So I think that the scrutiny and the disdain for Westbrook, I think, is only really amplified by the fact that he is playing with the Lakers, and the Lakers are the Lakers. It's not like if he was playing for say the Pistons, or nah, that's probably a bad example because they're a rebuilding team anyways. But just any kind of small market team or a team that's not really enriched with winning culture like the Lakers are, obviously that's going to be magnified. Now, when it comes to James Harden, he's somebody that undoubtedly in his prime, like peak of his peak, was, in conversations for, top three, definitely top four shooting guard of all time. I think there was, that little window where you could debate between him and Wade, but now, as it is right now, obviously that's all kind of like dead in the water. Obviously, Wade's got the championships, the fucking 36 point per game, whatever, in this first finals. Yeah, but James Harden, I think people tend to forget. I think he averaged what 36 in his MVP season, and that was like the most since like Wilt, I believe. I might be pulling out my ass, but the fact of the matter is, James Harden at his peak was like offense fully incarnated. I think you can make a point that he was not a better shooter, but I think just in terms of getting your shot off and just overall anchoring an offense, you there's a good point to be made that James Harden was definitely like at par with Steph, but even at some points, especially in the MVP season, potentially, above that. Now, with this whole Philly thing, I think it's similar in that Philly's the New York or the LA. No, Philly is the LA of the East Coast. So obviously there's all this magnitude. That it's a team that's literally ingrained in their culture that they'll boo their own players. They don't give a fuck. So I think in that same lane as with the Westbrook thing, it it definitely has a potential. But I also think considering the personnel that the Sixers have, obviously you got a big in his prime in Joel Embiid, you got a budding star in Maxi. They have all the tools I think to make a deep run, but it's just a matter of actually making that run. And in order to do that, James Harden got to hoop his ass off. So I think I don't think he'd be in the same lane as Russell, just because again, I think even though I'm making this comparison that Philly is so akin to LA, I also think it's still in like maybe like a tier below. So I think that while in the grand scheme of things they'd be on the same level, I do think the hate won't be as big as with Westbrook. But I also don't think James is going to be as much of a liability as Westbrook because we've seen him change his play style from instant offense, always handling the ball, to now where he's perceived as one of the best point guards at times. So we'll see what happens. And yeah, I think that was a long way of saying I think they're in the same tier, but just based off kind of how the narrative will form, I don't think it'll be looked at as bad as Westbrook. That was a good question though. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, to add on to it real quick, I think, for context, it really is just one of those things where I've personally felt a long time that both these players specifically, like these two players, have never been championship caliber players, and maybe Harden and Westbrook have obviously showed spurts of that. Like, I'm not saying they've never been it. Maybe I did just say that. But I do think it's just like that they've always been like kind of the Achilles heel to systems at the times. Like times where Harden would be like at like a 40% usage rate, and they sometimes win those games and they sometimes lose them because it was his shot or no shot.
That's
Same
a
with Russell
that's a
Westbrook.
good bar.
And yeah, I don't know, I think like for me, like there is something to be proven for both of these guys, and I just don't know if they're ever going to prove it. And I think it does come a time where you see like both of these players pretty much team up with the best stars in the league in their prime, and like even with like super teams, stuff like that, and they're still not necessarily clicking. But those players are a part of those reasons. Then you kind of start to question. I mean, Kyrie and Durant were championship caliber players, and keep in mind, obviously, they didn't play a lot of games together, but that shit fell apart really quickly too. And I mean, can't say it was all Harden's fault, but you look at this season and what it kind of means for him to make that move to Philly. If things don't pan out again, it's almost like, all right, where does this guy belong now? Like where is he gonna fit if he didn't fit with like you know possibly consensus top one, top two centers in the league? Like it doesn't really get that much better.
Definitely, definitely.
But yeah, what's your next question, DJ?
So kind of staying on the same lane, not about Harden, but there's a guy in here that I think you could fit into this question. But my next one is outside of a guy like Anthony Edwards, because obviously I think he's kind of touted as the next guy up kind of thing. Who would you say is poised for their first All Star appearance this upcoming season?
It's crazy you asked this question because I had a similar question too, but not exactly. Um, okay, off the top of your head, I don't know if you put this down in your question, but who are I'm honestly like, okay, I think for more context, I'm one of those NBA fans that can be like semi-casual and also very deep in it, but I think knowing who has an All-Star appearance is just like off the top of my head, I only know a few people that I mean, I know Tyrese, for example. I'll start there. Tyrese Halliburton is definitely someone who I think is going to definitely get like the mention. And it's definitely a possibility, but I think it is one of those things where he's not in a situation to kind of necessarily get the love for an All Star vote. Even if he does play his ass off, I mean, there's been players who took forever to be an All Star, like Bradley Beal, for example, because he's in that situation. So that, I think he's one of them. Um, De'Aaron Fox has never been an All Star. Eh?
No.
I think that's my pick. Honestly, I'm pretty high on De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox this year. I'm honestly thinking of drafting him top 3
Hey
this year
man,
for fantasy.
I'm on the Kings wave this year too, man. I think they're gonna be nice.
I mean, I think it was the last podcast we recorded together that I said the Kings are in contention for possibly making a playoff run this year, and I think that's the hottest take I think
That
I've said all year,
that's a
outside of basketball
very
and inside of
that's
basketball.
a very hot take. I'm more so for the play-in, but I will say I think Sacramento's gonna have something to cheer for that they haven't really had since like yeah shit since like fucking Chris Webber, White Chocolate, Peja, those guys were playing. But
No, exactly.
yeah, what makes you say
Uh,
you think De'Aaron Fox is gonna take that leap though?
well, I think it does have to. I think it contributes to a lot of things. Like I do think they're poised to make a playoff run based on kind of their personnel change, and also just where they kind of left off with Sabonis and Fox, and finally having Fox not having to start a season with like another ball dominant guard. I think that's one thing. It's just that he's gonna, I think, reform back to like the player he was the previous season before the last season. And I think for everyone who, I mean, for anyone who knows, I believe he averaged like close to 27 points per game,
Yeah, I think it was about
if I'm not
25,
mistaken.
27 at
Yeah,
his peak so far.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, those are numbers that are worth like kind of keeping an eye on. And I think everyone expected him last season to honestly make that leap again, and then didn't expect Tyrese Halliburton to necessarily like get in the way of that. And obviously, they just weren't meshing at that time. And to have Sabonis, who is kind of a complementary player, I think they're going to be tough to say, like top 3 pick and roll. I think in the league, to be honest, if everything goes right. So I think with like the standings that they'll be at, not being a low tier team and just having him reform to his shape, I think he's definitely one of the best guards out in the West, um, considering everything. And yeah, I don't know. I think he deserves that vote for sure.
Respect that. I respect that. Yeah, I think if I were to give a quick little vote, you already said him. I'm a big Tyrese Halliburton truther, man. I think he's definitely in the right situation to have the numbers to be an all star. He was already averaging about 20 and 10 in like the limited sample size he had, but considering he's playing alongside, Benedict Matrin, who I'm very high on, he still got Chris Duarte, uh, Miles Turner is going to come back healthy, hopefully. Jalen Smith was really budding. Isaiah Jackson's another young guy they got. I think Tyrese has a lot of the tools to get them stats up, you know what I'm saying? But I do think he's going to fall into, as you mentioned, the Bradley Beal category. And I think that really stems from the fact that, you know, evidently your team's got to be at least decent, you know, above 500 at the most or at the least.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably the one thing mainly hindering these two guys. But De'Aaron Fox probably has a better chance of making it. But all right, what's your next question?
All right. So this is a question that I think kind of has a lot of different answers to, and I don't think there's a wrong answer. But my question is to you: who do you think is genuinely in the best position for the future, both now and years ahead? So obviously looking towards this season, but also considering the years ahead and their situation. So, for example, take a look at the Lakers. I mean, as a prime example, they look good on paper with their three supposed all stars, but their future has been kind of shot out of the water with everything they've given up. So you kind of consider that as well. So who do you think overall, with both of those things considered, both this season and seasons ahead, looks like they'll be like say a dynasty for the future?
Yeah, my next question is going to be kind of in this similar vein, but let me look it up real quick about what this team's looking like. But to answer your question, in my opinion, I think the team with the best future looking forward is not necessarily the immediate future. Well, somewhat, because I think they're not going to, you know, make any noise or anything, but I think they're going to be decent. Is I'm going to say the Detroit Pistons, you know. Cade Cunningham is looking like the generational talent he's touted to be. Jaden Ivey is solid. Sadiq Bey is looking like the next upcoming 3-and-D guy to really break out. I think Marvin Bagley still has a lot of untapped potential he can get to. Beef Stew, you know, if there's one thing he really embodies, it's that Detroit grit and grind. He's willing to fight anybody, even the perceived GOAT. Uh, Jalen Duren, which I think was probably the finesse of the draft. Probably, not probably, I think unarguably, probably the best center outside of Chet and probably one of the most NBA ready players in terms of like the makeup. And that's not even talking about the nice veteran presence they have. Alec Burks is somebody that I think can really, not really anchor the team in any sense, but when it comes to having solid role players, you know, the Andre Iguodala's of the world, the Sean Livingstons, guys that aren't going to start on your team, but are the ones that really make the difference between winning and staying in the lottery. Alec Burks is that, and I think Nerlens Noel is another guy that is super solid. Like Kelly Olynyk, they have some super duper nice looking veteran depth, I think, and you combine that with what I think has the potential to be a very, very, very solid starting five. If I had to pick, I would probably start Cade, Jaden, Sadiq. I would put Beef Stew at the 4, and then Jalen Duren as my 5. I like Marvin Bagley, but you know maybe let him run the 6-man role. But yeah, in
All
short,
right.
I think they have a lot of the makeup to really have a super duper solid foundation. And yeah,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Fair enough. Of the Detroit Pistons as your pick, or what do I think as in?
Either or.
I mean, no, I think the kind of explanation of the Detroit Pistons is definitely, I think, good mention that maybe I didn't even think of, to be honest. And I think it's because honestly, Detroit has been considered a poverty franchise for the last couple of years that we've known, and obviously they've seen, hopeful actions that say otherwise. But I do think in this time around, with everything that's kind of flowing for them, there's I think a good possibility, and I think they were even a team I mentioned at some point that could really poised to kind of at least touch play-ins eventually in the next
I think
honestly
so.
season.
Yeah. And if
Yeah,
they fuck around and give Draymond the bag, shit, that team gonna be super
he
duper nice.
he could contribute. He is that guy, honestly. Um, in terms of who I honestly have, though, I mean, this is like a consensus pick, I think, for a lot of people, but I think it's who I kind of base this question around. But I think it's the Golden State Warriors. Um, I
Mm.
think this is like the golden, like, oh, fuck, I'm literally using. I think they're like what I would consider a perfect franchise in my mind. I mean, what all things considered, there is teams that I think can compare it just in terms of how they go about things. But when you really think about the Warriors' development and who they've raised up, obviously with their dynasty they have now and what they have coming in with Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, James Wiseman, the acquisition of Dante DiVincenzo, Andrew Wiggins, the list goes on. Um, it's pretty insane to me that they're going to honestly not really, take that much of a step back once, say their big three retires. I don't think literally any team can really speak to that right now. I don't think there's a championship caliber team that, if all their best players were to retire right now, that they would necessarily be able to still compete years after. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that take necessarily, but off the top of my head, there really isn't a team that matches that caliber of like, I guess like future depth that they've already developed.
No, yeah,
Uh,
definitely. I'm someone
like it,
who fully agrees with that. Yeah.
yeah, like there's no team in my head that really has figured out that equation. And I mean, Golden State Warriors have went from like a small market team to one of the biggest franchises in the world without question, and
On
it's all
God.
due to really just the upper level management that they have going on because something's working for them. And yeah, I don't know. Uh,
I
that's
like
it.
that. I like that. So obviously there's a big team we I think a lot of people would have probably said, but we both left them out. So I'm wondering. This is a perfect segue into my next question. What do you think the next, like, say 5 years looks like for the Oklahoma City Thunder? They got like I think it's like 19 picks or something. I don't know where that number came from. I think it's 19, but that might have been including this year's draft. But either way, they got a shit ton of picks and a very young roster that doesn't necessarily have well, there's somewhat of a direction, but I think it's really lacking in identity in a sense. But yeah, what do you think the near future looks like for the Oklahoma City Thunder?
To be honest, I think it looks good either way. I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't because, to be honest, they have the assets to really say blow up what they have now and just try to turn it into a win now team. Like they could definitely be that team. And I mean, nowadays you can't really say or if and not, and if they really are a like a desirable franchise to go towards. I mean, because they haven't really made a true acquisition since Chris Paul was on the team back in what was that when the Bucks won 2020,
I think it
2019?
was the year before. It was the bubble year.
Yeah, the year before the bubble year, because that was the same year. I'm pretty sure the Bucks won, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
I
wait,
just
you mean
remember
when
that.
like they really started? Yeah, that was
Yeah,
yeah, that was
yeah,
Giannis's second MVP.
yeah. And in between that, I mean, they haven't made any noticeable acquisitions because really they've just been pouring out for picks. Um, so I mean, it's hard to say like whether or not they're going to build up from what they have and turn into that franchise, or if they're going to blow it up. Um, I do 100% agree they don't really have much of an identity, and as I was saying before the technical difficulties, yeah, I think they lack some real identity right now. If I'm being honest, like NBA teams are really built on identities and also having players that shape those identities. And if you really look at their roster and like their, you know, conceived depth chart based off of ESPN, I feel like players like Darius Baisley and Jeremiah Robinson Earl are like players that, in another universe could be out of the league, respectfully. Just, I don't think they're those caliber of players that are going to really take them that much further. Uh, Players like Alexej Pokuchevsky, who honestly has been in and out of the league through the G League, and for what reason? To be honest, like they're not playing for anything in the first place. Like why are they bringing him down a notch. And obviously their big savior Chet Holmgren is not even going to be around for the season. I think honestly in 5 years they're just going to start kind of making it work. And I think the only players I can see really being on this roster in 5 years are Shea, Josh Giddey, and Chet. Because the rest of I mean, no disrespect, uh, Kenrich Williams to Trey Mann.
Man,
I
you
mean, but
put
these are
some
just
respect on Theo Maladon.
yo, I can't honestly. These are just these like you you gotta. I'm sure like these are just players that are not gonna put you over that hump. And they're good. They're still searching for those players, and Chet could be that player, but they're not even gonna know that for another year. And even after that, Chet, Josh, and Shea are not gonna solve Vance either. So it's really hard to say. I actually don't know how to answer this question, to be honest. I think they might be in disarray in 5 years for all I know.
Speaking of disarray, in my opinion, this is a hot take. The Oklahoma City Thunder's future is overrated as fuck, man. What is it, 19 picks or whatever? There's only 15 roster spots on a fucking team. What are you gonna do? I, you know, Too much of a good thing is always considered a problem in the sense, whether unless it's money, maybe. But well, that's a whole nother situation. But I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are walking into a situation where they're walking into a pigeonhole, and evidently, I don't think maybe forced is a stretch, but they're gonna be put in situations where they might have to like put pennies on the dollar kind of thing just because they don't have the roster spots, unless they decide to like take a bunch of like stash stash players. I don't know if those really count towards your 15-man roster, but either way, the number of picks they have supersedes the amount of roster spots they have, and for that reason, they might be backed into a deal where, like, say if they were to make a move for a super big name player, they might be able to say, "Hey, I know you got X amount of roster spots, but you got 10 times the amount of picks. Just throw a whole bunch in there," kind of thing. I think they're gonna walk into that kind of situation, or at least kind of be in some type of dilemma where evidently Sam Presti did too much of a good thing in a sense. And you know, this isn't to say that. Well, yeah, it is to say that their future's kind of like up in the air in a sense, but they do have solid guys. I'll give them that. But evidently, this is kind of like another little segue question I had, but we're not going to make it a question. But it's the fact that there's no veteran presence on that team. You know, Udonis Haslam, he's a perfect example, but there isn't really a guy to teach those guys how to play NBA basketball. These are, every NBA player, especially when they're a rookie, comes in thinking their dick is as big as an Eiffel Tower, to quote Kendrick Lamar. They think that they there ain't shit wrong with their game in a sense, and at evidently there's a lot wrong with their game. They don't really know how to play NBA basketball. The speed is something they adjust to, the culture, uh, the environment, all the faster pace of everything. Baby mamas. I mean, shout out to PJ Washington. Nah, but there isn't really like a Sifu sensei kind of guy on that team. And evidently, I think that's what every team needs, especially if you're a young team. Now, you combine that with the fact that they have so much draft capital, there's no way they can store it all. It's very either, it has a lot of boom or bust potential. Now, obviously, the safe route is to say, they have those picks. They're going to get a Victor Wembanyama. They're going to be able to get generational guys. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but I'm going to live on the edge a little bit. I think that they are going to walk into a bunch of situations where they're going to get hoed. Can you imagine how many picks Danny Ainge is going to like get out of Sam Presti if that were ever to be on the table? But yeah, that's my little that's my me matching your hot take with the Kings and De'Aaron Fox. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I honestly agree with that take 100% too. I mean, maybe we're delusional fans that don't maybe see quote unquote vision, and maybe some OKC diehard fans like, you know, Dick Munch on. But I personally just think, yeah, there's really not much to look forward to in this team right now. Like, I think Shea, in my mind, is expiring faster than they think.
Oh
He's
yeah,
how many
he's
seasons?
like slightly out of the window, I feel.
Like he's not even fitting into their timeline at this point. Like if they really wanted to, make a run whenever that run is, like he is just like I can imagine he's a player that doesn't not necessarily want to wait for his run forever because players at his point in his career were already, kind of poising to make runs with like that caliber of like just being a good player in the league, at least having some support. Like look at Luka Doncic, he's obviously been given some good teammates, and he's obviously generational talent. But every NBA player has that Sorry, every NBA player has that confidence, and I think for Shea to like kind of just like waste his like youthful years on a rebuilding team is one of those things where I honestly see it like ending up for him the way say like Kemba Walker's career ended,
That's a good
kind of
comp.
waiting around, kind of being like a star guard, but not necessarily having anything to show for it in terms of just anything. And then getting finally traded to say a Boston Celtics s team and not knowing how to play like NBA caliber basketball. You're finally in a position to do it, and then your career kind of tanks down. And you see where Kemba Walker's went. He's went to New York. He's now in Detroit, right?
I think so, but I'm pretty sure the plan is for him to get bought out. I don't know if that ever
But
happened, but yeah.
yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised honestly. And that Kemba Walker was like an all star like less than pretty sure less than 5 years ago. That's just I see Shea's career going that way. If things don't happen.
Shit, hopefully not, because I think he's got potential to be better than Steve Nash. All right, let's do one more question from each of us, and then we'll wrap it up. So what's the final question you want to get off your chest?
Um, this one was like kind of a question that I think maybe is just levitating in the air. And I think how do I put this? I think it's one of those questions that you could have answered when some people would be like, it's not a surprise. But do you think there's any surprise playoff appearances this year? Any potential surprise conference final appearances? I mean, obviously, like if you look at the West, there's a ton of teams that you could make considered to already have made it. I mean, LA, Pelicans, Timberwolves, Denver, those are all teams that I think are already considered like potential like potential conference final teams. And I mean, I'd say like if there is any team that's not mentioned that I just mentioned there, who do you think it would be?
Ooh. So basically, any team that can make a run a la 2021 Atlanta Hawks, right?
Like let's say to put it in a kind of analogy, a We Believe Warriors type deal. Like a eighth seed turn magical, or even a team that's just not considered to be that that team right now.
Hmm. Who can make the jump? Okay, looking at the standings here and all that.
I'm
Hmm.
not gonna lie, man. The West looks pretty.
The
I
West,
don't know if
the
there's any.
West is pretty stacked, and obviously for that reason, I know you said kind of outside of that, but this is a team I'm incredibly high on. I think their window is right about to open, and time is now, baby. It's Denver. Nikola Jokic has been the 1A and 1B, the best basketball player in the world next to Giannis, in my opinion. Obviously two different games completely, but what Jokic does and how the eye test and every single test indicates that he is amongst the best is riveting. You know, there is literally a world where the Denver Nuggets have at least solid health and they make at least a conference finals run, I think. Damn near like a finals run, if you ask me. I think Jamal Murray's going to come back. And even if he's not really at 100%, you don't necessarily need, well, because obviously it was like a torn Achilles or ACL or whatever. A lot of that really comes down to the athleticism. And no doubt, Jamal Murray is a guy who has the ability to jump above the rim. But at the end of the day, shooter's touch doesn't leave. And, he's a sniper for sure. And being able to play off of a Jokic that's had 2 years or had, yeah, two back to back MVPs, had the ability to really flesh out his game, flesh out, his ability to play make, whether it's at the top of the key, in the post, on the block, whatever. Jamal Murray is going to come back to a completely different player, in my opinion. Michael Porter Jr., he's probably the biggest X factor and kind of the boomer bust guy for this, in that we've seen him be a 25-point per game scorer, but we also see his most recently where that dude was struggling to even make 10 points. So the Denver Nuggets are a team I'm incredibly high on. I think they are looking way better. We're going to see Aaron Gordon not necessarily have to be number two. He's played that for his 2 years in Denver so far, essentially. And him taking a step back, I think will only make him better. Defenses aren't going to key on in him as much. He's just going to be in a way better situation to succeed. Bones Highland. This is definitely another kind of hot take, I guess, but low key, if not this year, maybe the next couple years, could be in the contention for that six man of the year type of award. He's got the makings of it, shifty, got decent playmaking, but at the end of the day, dude's a motherfucking bucket. And on a team that has a bunch of playmakers, a bunch of bucket getters, nothing wrong with getting more buckets, in my opinion. Not Russell Wilson. That's what Bill Russell said. So I think the team that is poised to make, maybe not necessarily a surprise, because I feel like a lot of people are also in the same boat where they think that the Nuggets are about to like really step into that window of contention. But I mean, 48 wins with a bunch of role players, and you're getting back two max guys. I'm not gonna say that it's like destiny, but essentially they're right in that position to really, you know, really do what Carmelo Anthony couldn't. But yeah.
100% agree. Denver is that team right now. I mean, I know I mentioned them, and to be honest, like I think they could still fit into that like dark horse role because truthfully, they've been out of that. Since Jamal Murray's injury and the bubble season, that they haven't necessarily like shown that they can beat that team. But I don't think people understand the caliber of that team.
No doubt.
Really, what really is kind of on the horizon for them. But for me, I mean, had to show some representation for my boy Ruben, but also because I genuinely feel this. But I think the Toronto Raptors are that surprise team. I mean, you look at their roster, and I think it's only like this year around that they've honestly started to gain some traction as like a team that like has a future. And I mean, if I didn't mention the Warriors, I think this is one of those teams that has a future outside of their star players. And to be honest, their star players are all very young. I mean, starting lineup of Fred, Van Vliet, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam. These are all players that I think honestly have something to prove in the league. Uh, Pascal Siakam, if I'm not mistaken, and this is the casual, non-casual fan in me, was the All NBA third team last year. Yes.
Pretty sure he was.
No. Yeah. These are things that I like slightly remember, but Pascal Siakam had a breakout season last year. I do know that, or at least had a better season than the previous. Scotty Barnes, obviously rookie of the year, going to his sophomore season. I think he's gonna be one of those players I think that just excels in his sophomore year. I know it's like infamous in the league for players to take a step down after a good rookie campaign, but this guy is built like a Tonka truck, like on the floor, like being able to play the point guard position with that frame. Like I don't know. I think this team is kind of a more refined version in some senses of what I think the Cavs were trying to do with their big man lineup. Like it's obviously a smaller version, but I do think they're like they're kind of three men up top are like just three bulky dudes. Pause. Sorry, I didn't know how to phrase that. But you know what I mean? Like OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Pascal Siakam, like all in a starting lineup, to me is a death lineup waiting to happen. And it's just a matter of like one player stepping up into that role that Kawhi kind of had in their championship.
Taking the
Because
reins,
truthfully,
yeah.
yeah, like because I do think that's what this team is really built to do. And I mean, it's maybe a matter of when, and maybe it's not next year. Um, but they do have the genetic makeup, the history, the experience to kind of be that team. And I mean, I haven't really even mentioned kind of what they have in their depth. I mean, Precious Achua showed really good spurts of just like kind of starting to develop into a young player. Obviously, I think that was kind of prolonged when he was on the Heat and not getting minutes. Chris Boucher, I think, has something to prove with kind of the feud he had with coaching staff, and the fact he was re-signed. I think shows that there is still like a good relationship there, and that they're going to kind of, I think, work him into the rotation a lot more this year. Uh, Malachi Flynn dropped, what is it, 70, 80,
Man,
80.
fuck Pro AMK. You're not bringing that up. Come on now.
I know, I'm just playing. Not one I just mentioned for fun. But I mean, he's one of those players who's got some fire in his heart. He's obviously like a scorer off the bench. Yeah, Otto Porter Jr. I think is definitely one of those things too. That's what coming off the championship. I think
I
he is one of
respect
those players
that.
that
I respect
makes
that.
immediate impact. But yeah, had to shout out the Raptors one time
Yeah,
for the man
Ruben.
missing in action.
Shout out to you, Ruben, man. All right, last question. It's kind of on this similar vein, but flat out, what team do you think has the most boom or bust potential? Not a team that's like obviously a shoe in or anything like that. Not a team that's gonna like, be like consensus. They're gonna be ass, but you know, who's right in that middle that they're either gonna be like really, really good or really, really bad.
Oh man, there's one team that I think a lot of people think of when this question is posed. I think it's the Brooklyn Nets, to be honest. I think every single player on that. Okay, not sorry. Let me rephrase. Every star player on that team is literally a boomer bust on their own. And I think that's kind of scary. I mean, because if you take away, say, Kyrie Irving, replace him with Patty Mills, that team just becomes that much less effective. Maybe that's not the best example, but say take away Kevin Durant because of some sort of drama, some sort of injury. You got Royce O'Neal coming in instead, and all of a sudden the team is just Kyrie Irving and maybe Ben Simmons. I think all these players, like these three star players, are, you know, I mean, it's been talked about. Like they could still be like a contending team. They could be the championship team without question. But they could also, with one bad piece of drama, one injury there, they could be like the word like another play-in team or even not even a play-in team, right? Just because I think much like how the Lakers are built, but in a bit more of a refined way where you have stars that are like still quote unquote like not past their prime or not like so injury ridden like say AD. Like I think they have still what it takes to be that contending team. Like I don't see that in the Lakers, but they haven't shown that in what the last few seasons have been. So yeah, this is the boomer bust team for me. I don't think there's anyone that really, in my mind, is built this way. It's been one of the most interesting topics of conversation, and honestly, if they kind of end out the season the way they ended out the last few seasons, I would be. I don't know. I would relocate that team again. Bring them Vancouver, man. Like at this point, it's just an embarrassment.
Oh
Like
God.
to basketball.
Oh God. Yeah, that's a solid pick for me. I think it's Atlanta. I think that you know their move, if you made it, say now, with the Donovan Mitchell thing having already happened, I think the chatter is very minimal. I'm not saying DeJounte Murray's ass. That's really not the conversation I'm trying to have. But I think a lot of what the Atlanta Hawks are touted for is sort of the idea of what that backcourt can be. Well, granted, that's all you really have to go off of right now. But overall, these are two high usage guys. These are guys that are used to having the ball in their hand. They're used to having the ball in their hand. They're used to having very high like touches and all that stuff. But that and Trey Young's kind of looked at as this like heir apparent to Steph Curry. And sure, here and there, maybe. I think Steph's much more of a natural point guard than Steph, or Trey is much more of like a natural point guard than Steph is. Just like how I think Steph's much more of a better shooter than Trey is. And the idea of Trey Young going off ball seems cool. He's small. He's going to be able to get through screens easier. He's going to be able to like run on the court and all that stuff. It's going to be hard to like, you know, put a mark on him at all times. But, you know, I think until we see it, that's still the next thing to be seen. Same thing with DeJounte. He's a dude who you could say wouldn't be on shit if he didn't get drafted to San Antonio. San Antonio is known for having very, very good developmental staff. That's not to say he's going to fall off a cliff, but overall, if there's one team that I'm kind of like, their stock was here at the beginning of the offseason with the trade they made. And then with all this stuff happening in the Eastern Conference, again, the Donovan Mitchell trade, there, if I had to be very blunt, the outlook I have right now is probably the plane. If I'm being real, let me look at like
Yeah,
let me look at the teams again to be like 100% sure on that. But okay, if I'm looking here, yeah. So I mean, looking at the teams that are in front of me: Miami, Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Cleveland. And I think Brooklyn on paper, it's either Brooklyn or Chicago. So those are like, what is that? Five teams that I think are for sure going to be above them, and two guys that I'm like, they're. I would say the boom is more potential for them rather than the bust. And even then, I think you take this first year not necessarily as a wash or anything like that, but I would temper my expectations in that it's two guys that are again used to having the ball in their hand, used to getting all the touches, and now that's going to be like slashed in a sense. So we'll see how it goes, but as of right now, I think the Atlanta Hawks have the most boomer bust potential.
that's a really interesting take that I think really opened my eyes. I mean, I have the Eastern Conference standings right in front of me too, and yeah, I think it's gonna be tough for them honestly to kind of even with such a big trade, such a big acquisition of Dejounte Murray to actually make that impact on the Eastern Conference. Honestly, and I do think it's honestly going to take, I think, more than Dejounte Murray as an acquisition for them to, compete for like a spot. I think it's going to take a lot of stepping up as well.
I think
Yeah,
DeAndre Hunter, I think, is poised for a big season. I hope Onyeka Okongwu gets a lot of burn. You know, I think he's able to play much more of that positionless basketball than Clint Capella. And who else did? I mean, the Jalen Johnson dude they drafted, he ain't really get much burn. I don't really know if he's really on shit, but you know, it
I do
is.
think a lot of. Sorry, go
Oh no, I don't even know what I was gonna say. What were you gonna say?
on. No, I honestly think. I mean, I'm not saying it ain't on him, but I do think we need to see a bit more of John Collins too in order for
Oh,
this
how could I? Yo,
pyramid to work.
I'm a big John Collins truther. Uh,
I do think so. I am
I
too,
I think he's
honestly.
gonna get back to 20 and 10. But again, I think the whole foundation and the whole thing of this pyramid being erected is based on how that duo plays together.
Yeah, I 100% think that's how this has to go. Like, in order for the Trey Young Dejounte Murray experiment to work, I think John Collins has to play an equal part in that because really these are two players that are kind of pass first guards at the end of the day. I mean, obviously they're dominant enough to like get their own, but at the end of the day, you have players like John Collins and Clint Capella who are going to have to be fed the ball as much to win games. So I do think he is going to have to step up, and I think he will. But I do think I can see entirely why you think they're boomer bust team because I think there's just a lot of moving pieces in the cog, and one piece taken out or one kind of fault, they're kind of still that playing team this year.
Nice, nice, nice. With that being said, this has been another episode of the Black Top Podcast. Hopefully next week we're back whole again. Christian, you got any last words or anything?
No, I don't.
Nah.
I gotta say some fuck shit.
All right, that's a perfect place to end. With that being said, stay safe, stay blessed. We'll see you all soon.